In my recent collection of essays, Past Lives of Old Books, I included one on Chapman Winston Blubberhouse. It's difficult to know where to begin in relating the story of the poet Chapman Winston Blubberhouse. If I was to assert that he was created one summer afternoon by myself and Mark Valentine as we stood on the steps of Blubberhouse's church in Yorkshire, some would think this as presumptuous as Alden's claim that he conceived John Betjeman in a punt in Oxford. So just what can you believe? In 1993 I published a very small pamphlet on Blubberhouse. I used the pseudonym J. Witchwood to tell the story of his life, and Mark Valentine was credited as M. Cardigan when supplying the bibliography. We noted that Blubberhouse was born on New Year's Eve, 1899, close enough to the naughty 90s of Oscar Wilde and Aubrey Beardsley to allow him to claim sympathy with the decadents. At Oxford he was meant to have met Algernon Blooms, a would-be war poet who in 1918 committed suicide in sympathy with those who had died on the battlefields of France. Blubberhouse became obsessed with death and his own misfortune in being too young to be called up. He soon hit upon the idea of a best-selling novel, and The Spaces in Between was published in 1920. He himself described it as a pornographic melodrama destined to ruffle the precious feathers of the refined public and sell by the barrowload. The book failed to live up to his hopes. This pamphlet was sent to various bookish friends and, if asked, I admitted that it was a spoof. The photos of Blubberhouse and his family were courtesy of an old album bought at auction. However, one book dealer was soon advertising for Blubberhouse's books, and we thought we'd better keep our heads down. A few weeks later, I received a letter that undermined my understanding of the universe. It was addressed from the Old Hermitage, the Close, Salisbury, Wiltshire. Sir, an antiquarian bookseller, who happens to number me among his customers, has forwarded your publication, C.W. Blubberhouse, A Brief Biography. As you will observe from the proleptic signature appended to this communication, the subject of your opuscule is still very much alive, albeit frail, and in the poor health which befits a nonagenarian. While exceedingly flattered by the attentions of yourself and your colleagues, J. Witchwood and M. Cardigan, I am presuming, perhaps naively, that these personages possess corporeal existence. I should have thought that common courtesy, if not common sense, would have dictated that you make some cursory attempts to determine whether I was among the quick or the dead before publishing and distributing your monograph. A communication sent care of the Society of Authors or the Savage Club would have found me. Inevitably, perhaps, your publication contains a number of egregious errors and inexactitudes. Were I to enumerate all the production's shortcomings, this letter would probably exceed the length of your jeu d'esprit, so I shall confine myself to only the most serious matters. And so it goes on, rather pompously, but rather wonderfully. It ends, with qualified thanks for your kind interest in the products of my pen, I remain, sir, C.W. Blubberhouse. I actually wondered if I had made some horrendous mistake, and that Mark Valentine had been talking about a real writer and I had completely misunderstood him, adding all kinds of nonsense out of my own imagination. It didn't help that Blubberhouse continued to write to me, and he sent me clippings from newspapers and magazines that felt compelled to publish Blubberhouse's letters to their editors. It did not seem that there was any subject that he was not willing to address, whether it was Coronation Street, in the Daily Mail, 22nd of December 1993, James Hewitt and Princess Diana, again the Daily Mail, 7th of September 1994, or many other varied topics of popular interest in The Stage and Time Out. Blubberhouse was amused, no doubt, when, in 1994, a Sunday newspaper asserted that he was too good to be true. The Sunday Times attacked the Times Literary Supplement for printing Blubberhouse's letter in defence of publishers' puffs. Blubberhouse had written, Sir, I must take issue with Michael Howard's complaint about publishers' promotional tactics in asking authors for commendatory puffs. Why shouldn't publishers solicit some acclaim for books in order to catch the eye of discriminating and cash-conscious readers? By way of contrast to Professor Howard's peevish announcement in your columns, I hereby give notice to all concerned that I should be delighted to consider any publisher's requests for endorsements. I doubt whether my ungainly, unpoetic name on a dust jacket would encourage sales, but it may prompt my own publishers to rescue my novels and verse collections from woeful obscurity and bring them back into print. Blubberhouse had also written to the Sunday Times, which led them to investigate their correspondent. Their diary section reported, amid the usual bundle of bristling epistles from distinguished highbrows, the letters page of last week's Times Literary Supplement included a contribution from one Chapman W. Blubberhouse. Last month, Mr. Blubberhouse sent a letter to the Sunday Times book section objecting to a vendetta against Jeanette Winterson, but a rat was smelt. Extensive sleuthing could unearth no record of a Blubberhouse at the Salisbury address he provided. So the chivalrous missive went unprinted. They end by saying that the episode makes one look askance at a letter in the current London Review of Books, in which a Mr. Clayton Naff of Tokyo objects to the tragic popularity in the vernacular of his surname. In 1995, I received photocopies from Blubberhouse of pages from 2 different reference books that mentioned both him and Algernon Bloom's. I assumed that these were elaborate mock-ups, but by this time I was really not certain of anything. I even tried taking Blubberhouse over for myself, but to no avail. When I wrote to newspapers under his name, they immediately saw through me. In 1998, an old friend, Roger Dobson, wrote to say that a mutual friend, Rupert Cook, an Oxford bookseller, was gravely ill. It appeared that the two of them had had a fine old time writing to all manner of people under the guise of Blubberhouse. The final flourish for our fictional poet was a discussion of his activities on Radio 4's Home Truths programme in September 2001 with the late John Peel. Again, I hope that the show would have amused Blubberhouse himself, for once again it was pronounced in the national media that he never existed. John Peel remarked to me that Mark Valentine and I sounded like an impossible bunch of smart alecks, which was fair enough. Sadly, Roger Dobson died in 2013. The following year, Mark Valentine and I were able to look through his papers, in which there was a large folder of material about Blubberhouse, which revealed the time and effort he had put into bringing him to life. Among his books was a copy of St Edmund Hall, Oxford, Who's Who, a directory of alumni from that august university college, and of course it contained an entry for Blubberhouse. And in going through Roger Dobson's papers, I'd like to add an addenda to my essay about Blubberhouse. The first thing to say is that Blubberhouse's first letter to me was dated the 3rd of December 1993, and in the same month, on the 22nd, he was already in print in the Daily Mail. Roger also wrote a letter on the same subject at the same time as Alan Marriott, a pseudonym he often used, but that was not published. Blubberhouse also had a letter printed in The Stage the following month, January 1994, and Roger, now writing as Alan Marriott, then replied to him in the next issue. Blubberhouse was then given a right of reply to Alan Marriott the week later. Just as much fun is the fact that in July 1994, Blubberhouse had a letter published in The Independent about an Oxford college hoping to rename itself Kellogg College. And a few days later, Roger saw print under his own name replying to Blubberhouse. I also found some of Roger's other nom de plumes. Larry Hillier, unpublished as far as I know. Malcolm Mohn, who was published in The Bookseller, The Evening Standard and The Voice, all in 1995. J.F. Fuggles, who was published in the London Review of Books, and Clayton Naff, who was published in the Daily Mail, the Evening Standard, and the London Review of Books, and who was alluded to by the Sunday Times when they smelt a rat. I also found a draft copy of the letter that Blubberhouse sent to the Sunday Times in defence of Jeanette Winterson that they didn't publish, but alluded to when they revealed Blubberhouse to be a hoax in August 1994. Blubberhouse wrote, "When is the Sunday Times going to call a halt to its vendetta against Jeanette Winterson? Hardly a week passes without some attack appearing in the literary supplement. one could understand this persecution if the victim were some devious politician or publicity-crazed pop star, but to pillory one of our most challenging and exciting novelists simply because she has a justifiably high opinion of her talents smacks of a witch hunt. Doubtless this letter will not see print, but fair play prompts me to defend a truly original writer. She should be treasured, not hounded. Thank you, Blubberhouse.